24-year-old Black trans woman living in Grand Rapids. I've been here for 12 years now, and yeah, so I just kind of wanted to come up here and kind of be a voice for people who I don't necessarily see when I go to events like this. And that's like no shade, but I don't really see a lot of people of color in these spaces, so I'm here to kind of add that to the rainbow. But I just wanted to kind of talk about just what was kind of been talked about earlier and just kind of being visible. And I think when it comes to being a trans person and being visible, especially like a trans woman, a lot of times we are visible, but what's lacking is we're not being respected as we're being visible. So we're being seen, but we're not being heard, and when we're heard, we're not listened to, and when we're listened to, we're not understood. And I just really want to encourage, I know y'all don't need this is more for like, people who need it, but I just want to encourage every person who's trans here, every person who's gender non-conforming, especially, and I want to be specific and intentional and say especially Black non-conforming and Black trans people, that there is a community out there, you just have to find them, and it's really hard, but stick with it. And also, just to kind of like clarify, I also was thinking about like the language that we use a lot when we're talking about being trans or whatever. When we say like I came out, or as like queer people, when we say like I came out or I'm coming out, I like to say like I'm affirming my identities, because there's kind of this like centering of cis heteronormativity in a lot of these discussions. So it's like when you say you're coming out, what are you coming out of? And I was never cis and I was never straight, so I'm not coming out of those things. I'm affirming who I am. It's new to y'all, but it's true to me. So I like to say that I like to just be really mindful of the language that I use when I talk about those things. Yeah, I don't like to use the words coming out or any of that. I've heard it here tonight, and that's fine, but it's just like a little personal note. And also, for me, I know like a lot of like these issues are kind of personal to who we are, and so those definitions are changing. I know that happens for me a lot too. I'm like, I don't know all these like new. I'm lost. I'm just trying to listen to Beyonce and pizza. Like I'm not talking about that, but I like with a lot of these terms and just the language that we use. Like I said, I like to be really intentional about those things, because as I mentioned earlier about being visible and being seen, they're two different things, and it's all connected. But me personally, I don't identify as a cross-dresser. That's not something that I identify as, because I'm not crossing anything. I'm a woman, so nothing's being crossed, so I'm not transferring over to anything. If that's how you identify, that's totally cool, that's you, but I think that, once again, this is more of like a conversation that needs to happen with cis people about just the kind of like the nuances. I feel like what happens a lot of times with marginalized groups is that we're not allowed to be seen as nuanced. We're monolized, and what happens with that monolization is that we lose a lot of the intricacies and the colors, and we lose a lot of our humanity. And so my purpose in being a visible Black trans woman who is a working class trans woman, I ride the bus, I walk everywhere, I don't have a car, have a roommate, I have 3 roommates, but it's just like, I'm not like some privileged, spoon fed. I know I look like it, but I'm not like some privileged spoon-fed woman who's just like living like life on the lam and just being really happy with everything. But what was my point? With those things, we're talking about language and just being intentional about language. Yeah, so I know that like these are conversations that need to happen a lot more with cis people. And another like point that I like to kind of raise is just the discussion about what makes a woman or what makes a man. And as I mentioned earlier, like however you define that is up to you, and that's your journey and your story. But you hear a lot of times that like a lot of people like to boil things down to gender essentialism and say like, well, if you have an XY chromosome or if you have an XX chromosome, you're this or you're that. And we found that like in recent times with the advent of science, but like with the advent of science, that a lot of that is a lot more, once again, nuanced and complex. And a lot of times those things are simplified because people just don't want to have those conversations. And so just my encouragement to everybody here today is just don't be afraid to have those conversations. And even if your voice shakes, I know it's been said like a million times, but even if your voice shakes, like still speak. And also listen to understand, don't listen to argue with people. I think that's something that I've really been trying to incorporate into my life, is just, you know, let people talk and really like hear what they're saying,